When the two men walked in at 11:47 p.m., Harold knew immediately they weren't there for milk. It was the way they moved, too casual, eyes darting, hands staying in pockets. 30 years behind a cash register had taught him to read people, but the 40 years before that had taught him to stop them. Welcome to the real tale. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden courage and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These moments matter. Miller's grocery store sat on the corner of 5th and Main, a tired building with flickering neon signs and parking spaces that hadn't been repainted since the Clinton administration. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted trouble, but it wasn't the kind that avoided it either. Just another 24-hour convenience store in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. Harold Martinez had worked the night shift for 12 years. Same schedule, same routine, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Tuesday through Saturday. He preferred the quiet hours when the store belonged to insomniacs, third-shift workers, and the occasional teenager buying energy drinks with crumpled dollar bills. During the day, the store buzzed with soccer moms and retirees who asked too many questions and made too much conversation. At night, people minded their own business. At 68, Harold moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to waste motion. His hair was silver white, kept short in a style that hadn't changed in 5 decades. He wore the same uniform every shift, navy blue polo shirt with Miller's embroidered above the pocket, khaki pants pressed sharp enough to cut paper, and black non-slip shoes that had logged more miles than most people's cars. The younger employees called him Mr. Harold, with the kind of respect usually reserved for grandfathers. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper, never seemed rattled by anything. Not angry customers, not system crashes, not even the time a drunk college kid threw up all over aisle 3. Harold simply cleaned it up, restocked the shelves, and continued his shift like nothing had happened. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Harold Martinez had spent 38 years learning how to stay calm under pressure. Before Miller's grocery, before the quiet suburban nights and fluorescent lighting, he had been Staff Sergeant Harold Martinez, United States Marine Corps, 1st Force Reconnaissance Company. 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in the Persian Gulf, and 1 classified deployment that officially never happened. But that was another life, another man. The Marine Corps had taught him to observe, assess, and act. 12 years of retail had taught him to smile, scan, and say, "Have a nice day." Most nights, the skills overlapped more than people realized. The clock above the register read 11:47 p.m. when they walked in. Harold was restocking cigarettes behind the counter, methodically arranging packs of Marlboros in perfect rows. The electronic chime announced their entrance. 2 men, mid-20s, wearing hoodies despite the warm September night. Harold didn't look up immediately. One of the first things they teach you in Recon is never to let a potential threat know you've spotted them. Instead, he continued his work, using peripheral vision to track their movement. The taller one headed toward the beer cooler. The shorter one browsed the snack aisle, but his eyes weren't on the products. Something was wrong. Harold had developed an instinct for danger over 7 decades of life, 38 years in uniform, 32 years out. These men moved like predators, not customers. The tall one kept glancing toward the counter. The short one's right hand never left his hoodie pocket. Harold finished with the cigarettes and moved to the register, positioning himself with a clear view of both men and easy access to the silent alarm button beneath the counter. His movements were casual, unhurried. To any observer, he was just an old man doing his job. The tall one approached first, grabbing a 6-pack of beer from the cooler. He set it on the counter with more force than necessary, the bottles clinking against each other. Up close, Harold could see he was nervous. Dilated pupils, sweating despite the air conditioning, jaw clenched tight. "Just this," the man said, not making eye contact. Harold scanned the barcode. "I'll need to see some ID." The man's hand froze halfway to his back pocket. "What?" "For the beer. Store policy." There was a pause. The shorter man had stopped pretending to shop and was now standing at the end of the counter, still keeping his hand in his pocket. Harold's training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat level, identify potential weapons, plan multiple exit strategies. "I don't have my ID," the tall man said finally. Harold nodded calmly. "No problem. I can't sell you the beer, but is there anything else I can help you with?" That's when everything changed. The short man's hand came out of his pocket, and Harold saw the gun before the safety was even off. A cheap .38 revolver, probably stolen, definitely not well maintained. The kind of weapon that was more dangerous to the user than the target, but dangerous nonetheless. "Open the register," the short man said, his voice higher than he probably intended. "Now." Harold looked at the gun, then at the man holding it, then back at the gun. His expression didn't change. 40 years of training don't disappear just because you're wearing a name tag instead of dog tags. "Sure thing," Harold said quietly. He hit a key on the register, and the drawer slid open with its familiar electronic ding. The tall man leaned over the counter, reaching for the cash drawer. That was his first mistake. In one fluid motion, Harold grabbed the man's wrist and yanked him forward, using his momentum to slam his head into the counter. The man dropped like a sack of potatoes, blood streaming from his nose. The short man with the gun panicked, swinging the weapon toward Harold. That was his first and last mistake. Harold was already moving. 38 years of muscle memory took over as he vaulted over the counter, something no 68-year-old should have been able to do, and closed the distance before the gunman could process what was happening. Harold's left hand deflected the gun, while his right delivered a precise strike to the man's solar plexus. The gunman doubled over, gasping. Harold relieved him of the weapon in a move so smooth it looked rehearsed, then applied a blood choke that had the man unconscious in under 10 seconds. Total elapsed time, 23 seconds. Harold stood in the middle of his store, looking down at two unconscious would-be robbers, holding a gun he hadn't touched in over a decade. His breathing was steady, his hands weren't shaking, and his first thought was that he needed to call the police before the tall one woke up and started bleeding on the freshly mopped floor. He was reaching for the phone when he heard the voice behind him. Holy shit. Harold turned. A young woman stood in the doorway, holding a bag of chips and an energy drink, her mouth open in shock. College-aged, probably coming back from a late study session, completely unprepared for what she'd just witnessed. "Oh, are you okay?" Harold asked, as calmly as if he were asking about her day. She nodded slowly, still staring at the two men on the ground. Are they unconscious? They'll be fine." Harold picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Police, please. I need to report an attempted robbery at Miller's Grocery on 5th and Main." While he talked to the dispatcher, the young woman, her name was Sarah, she managed to tell him between stammers, called her boyfriend, who called his roommate, who posted something on social media. By the time the police arrived, word was already spreading. Officer Janet Williams was the first responder, a 15-year veteran who thought she'd seen everything until she walked into Miller's and found two grown men zip-tied with merchandise restraints sitting against the beer cooler, while an elderly store clerk calmly filled out paperwork. "You did this?" she asked Harold, looking from him to the suspects and back again. "They attempted to rob the store," Harold replied. "I defended myself and the property." Officer Williams looked at the scene more carefully. The cash register was untouched. The gun was properly secured and unloaded on the counter. The suspects were restrained but uninjured, except for the tall one's bloody nose. Everything was textbook perfect, like someone had studied police procedure manuals. "Sir, can I ask what your background is?" Harold handed her his ID. "Retail." "Before retail." "United States Marine Corps. Retired." That explained some of it, but not all. Officer Williams had known plenty of ex-military, and most of them couldn't disarm two armed robbers like they were changing a tire. Detective Mike Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, followed by the store manager, a local news crew, and a growing crowd of curious neighbors. By midnight, Miller's Grocery looked like a crime scene from a movie. Police cars, flashing lights, yellow tape, and a very confused reporter trying to understand how a 68-year-old store clerk had single-handedly stopped an armed robbery. Harold answered their questions with the same calm precision he brought to everything else. Yes, he saw the men enter. Yes, he realized they intended to rob the store. Yes, he acted in self-defense. No, he wasn't injured. No, he didn't consider himself a hero. "I was just doing my job," he told the reporter when she asked how he felt about stopping the robbery. "But you could have been hurt. Weren't you scared?" Harold considered this for a moment. Fear is a luxury you can't afford when lives are at stake. The reporter sensed there was more to the story. You mentioned you're a Marine veteran. Did that training help tonight? Training helps with everything, Harold said simply. It wasn't until Detective Rodriguez was reviewing the security footage that the full picture emerged. The cameras had captured everything: the robbers entering, Harold's immediate recognition of the threat, his tactical positioning at the register, and the lightning-fast resolution of the situation. Jesus, Rodriguez muttered, watching the footage for the third time. This guy moves like special forces. He paused the video at the moment Harold vaulted the counter. Most 68-year-olds had trouble getting out of bed without help. Harold had moved like a man half his age with training beyond anything Rodriguez had seen outside of action movies. Rodriguez made a phone call. 20 minutes later, his computer screen showed Harold's military record, or at least the parts that weren't classified. Staff Sergeant Harold Martinez, USMC, enlisted 1972, honorably discharged 1994, multiple deployments, multiple commendations, and one detail that made Rodriguez whistle low under his breath: Force Reconnaissance. Force Recon was the Marine Corps' elite special operations unit. These weren't regular Marines, they were the tip of the spear, deep reconnaissance specialists who operated behind enemy lines with minimal support. The kind of men who could infiltrate, gather intelligence, and disappear without anyone knowing they'd been there. The kind of men who could disarm two robbers without breaking a sweat. Rodriguez closed the file and looked out at Harold, who was patiently answering the same questions for the fourth time. The old man had never mentioned his special operations background, hadn't bragged, hadn't tried to impress anyone, hadn't even brought it up when explaining his actions. He was just a grocery store clerk who happened to be one of the deadliest men Rodriguez had ever met. The story hit local news first, then social media, then national outlets. Within 48 hours, the security footage had been viewed over 2 million times. News crews arrived from 3 states away. The hashtag #grocery store hero was trending on Twitter. Harold hated every minute of it. He'd taken 2 personal days to avoid the media circus, but by Thursday night he was back at his register, scanning groceries and bagging items like nothing had happened. The younger employees looked at him differently now, not with the casual familiarity they'd shown before, but with something closer to awe. "Mr. Harold?" asked Jessica, a college sophomore who worked weekends. "Is it true you're like Special Forces?" Harold finished scanning a customer's milk and bread before answering. "I was a Marine." "But like elite Marines, right? The news said Force Recon." "Just Marines," Harold said quietly. What he didn't tell Jessica, what he didn't tell the reporters, what he didn't tell anyone, was that his service record only told half the story. The classified half, the part that would never appear in any news report, included 3 years attached to Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies, and Observations Group. SOG, the most classified special operations unit of the Vietnam War. While Force Recon conducted reconnaissance behind enemy lines, SOG conducted psychological operations, prisoner snatches, and direct action missions that officially never happened. Harold had spent 3 years doing things that would remain classified long after he was dead. The men and women he'd served with were legends in the special operations community. Many hadn't made it home. Those who did rarely talked about what they'd done. Harold had spent 30 years in civilian life without once mentioning SOG, and he wasn't about to start now. But word has a way of traveling in certain circles. On Friday morning, Harold arrived at work to find a man waiting by the employee entrance. Mid-50s, gray hair, wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He looked like any other customer except for his posture. Spine straight, eyes alert, the kind of bearing that never fully disappears. "Harold Martinez?" the man asked. "Store doesn't open for another hour," Harold replied, fishing for his keys. "I'm not here to shop." The man extended his hand. "Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Chen, Navy SEALs, retired." Harold paused, keys halfway to the lock. In special operations circles, reputation mattered more than rank. Stories traveled through decades and across service branches. If a retired SEAL had tracked him down, it meant someone had been talking. "What can I do for you, Master Chief?" "My grandson was in that store Tuesday night. College kid, probably buying energy drinks and junk food. He saw what you did." Harold waited. "Kid's been talking about joining the Navy. Asked me what I thought about SEALs. I told him they're good, but Marines are better." Chen smiled. "Especially Force Recon. Especially SOG." Harold's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Your grandson have a name?" "Tyler Chen. Probably told you his whole life story while you were giving your statement to the police." Harold remembered him now. Tall kid, engineering student, had been asking questions about the aftermath until his grandfather called to check on him. "He's a good kid," Harold said. "He wants to meet you. Properly, I mean. And I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For reminding people that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear name tags." Harold unlocked the employee entrance and held the door open. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." They sat in the break room, two old warriors who had served in different branches but understood the same code. Chen had done 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Harold had done 3 in Vietnam and the Gulf. Both men had seen things they'd never talk about, done things they'd never forget. "You know the media's calling you a hero," Chen said, sipping his coffee. "Media calls a lot of people heroes. Doesn't make it true." "What would you call it then?" Harold thought for a moment. "Tuesday night," Chen laughed. "Fair enough, but you know this won't blow over, right? Once word gets out about SOG, every news outlet in the country is going to want to interview you." "Word's not getting out." "Harold, your story's already viral. Someone's going to dig deeper. Someone always does." Harold set down his coffee cup. "Then I'll deal with it when it happens." They talked for another 20 minutes. About service, about transition to civilian life, about the strange experience of being ordinary after being extraordinary. When Chen left, he handed Harold a business card. "My grandson's number, and mine. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call." Harold pocketed the card without looking at it. "Tell Tyler he's welcome to stop by, but no questions about Tuesday night. He's got other questions, about service, about what it means to be a Marine. Those I can answer." Saturday night, Tyler Chen did stop by. Harold was restocking the candy aisle when the young man walked in, nervous but determined. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Tyler, Robert Chen's grandson." Harold looked up from the Snickers bars. The kid was 20, maybe 21. Good shoulders, steady eyes, the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he'd been raised right. "Your grandfather's a good man. He says the same about you." Tyler hesitated. "He also said you might be willing to talk about military service, not about Tuesday night, just the Marines." Harold finished the candy display and leaned against his cart. The store was quiet, just them and a trucker buying coffee at the other end of the building. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. I mean, I know Grandpa's stories about the SEALs, but he says Marines do things differently. That Force Recon is something special." Harold studied the young man for a moment. In Tyler's face, he saw echoes of himself at that age, curious, eager, ready to commit to something bigger than himself. "Marines don't do things differently," Harold said finally. "Marines do things right. Force Recon does them right under impossible circumstances." "Is it true what they're saying online, that you were special operations?" "I was a Marine. Everything else is just details." Tyler smiled. "Grandpa said you'd say something like that." They talked for 20 minutes while Harold worked. About duty, about service, about the decision to put something larger than yourself before your own comfort. Harold didn't give him speeches or slogans, just honest answers to honest questions. "Can I ask one thing about Tuesday night?" Tyler said as Harold was closing up. "Depends on what it is." "Were you scared?" Harold locked the register and looked at the young man. "Fear's a tool, not an emotion. You use it to stay sharp, stay alive, but you never let it make decisions for you." "Is that something they taught you in the Marines?" "That's something life taught me. The Marines just gave me a place to practice." As Tyler left, Harold watched him walk to his car with the purposeful stride of someone who'd made a decision. The kid would be fine, whatever he chose to do. Harold finished closing the store and walked to his truck, a 15-year-old Ford that had never let him down. The parking lot was empty except for his vehicle and the security lights casting long shadows across the asphalt. As he drove home through quiet suburban streets, Harold reflected on the week that had changed everything and nothing. He was still a grocery store clerk. He still worked nights, scanned barcodes, and said, "Have a nice day" to customers who barely saw him. But somewhere in the space between Tuesday night and Saturday morning, something had shifted. People looked at him differently now, not with pity or dismissal, but with a kind of recognition. For 30 years, Harold had been invisible, just another old man in a service job, forgotten by a world that had moved on without him. In 23 seconds on a Tuesday night, that invisibility had shattered. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Harold pulled into his driveway, a small ranch house in a neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed and the mailboxes were all painted the same shade of blue. He'd lived here for 15 years, long enough to know his neighbors' names but not their stories. Inside, he hung his work shirt in the closet next to 11 identical shirts, poured himself a glass of water, and sat in his recliner, the one piece of furniture in the house that showed any wear. On the coffee table lay a stack of interview requests from news outlets he'd never heard of. On his answering machine, 17 messages from reporters, producers, and documentary filmmakers. His phone had rung so many times he'd stopped answering it. Harold looked at the pile of papers and reached for the remote control. Tomorrow was Sunday, his day off. He planned to spend it the same way he spent every Sunday, quietly, alone, letting the world spin without him. But as he clicked through channels, stopping briefly on a news report about the grocery store hero, Harold realized that his days of invisibility were over. Whether he wanted it or not, he had become a symbol of something people needed to believe in. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The answer, Harold decided, was simple. He was going to keep showing up, keep doing his job, keep being exactly who he'd always been, a Marine who happened to work retail, not a hero who happened to be old. Because heroes, as Harold had learned in 38 years of service and 30 years of civilian life, weren't the ones who did extraordinary things. Heroes were the ones who did ordinary things extraordinarily well, day after day, without asking for recognition or reward. Heroes were the ones who showed up. And on Monday night at exactly 10 p.m., Harold Martinez would clock in for another shift at Miller's Grocery, ready to scan groceries, bag items, and remind anyone who needed reminding that courage doesn't retire. It just changes uniforms. Some warriors fight with weapons. Others fight with quiet dignity, steady hands, and the unshakable conviction that doing right matters more than being noticed. Harold had spent 68 years learning the difference, and he planned to spend however many years he had left proving it. So tell me, have you ever encountered someone who seemed ordinary until you learned their story? Someone who carried their strength quietly, without needing the world to know? Share their name in the comments. Let us honor the Harold Martinezes of the world, the quiet heroes who walk among us every day. If this story moved you, subscribe to The Real Tale. We're here to remind you that courage doesn't always wear a uniform, and heroes don't always carry flags. Sometimes they just carry themselves with dignity. And that's enough to change the world. Until next time, remember, the most powerful stories aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're whispered by men and women who never asked to be heard, but who deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next story.